Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Timeless. So obviously the big thing this episode being the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And there's so much stuff to this episode. Like, it is kind of the theme that you've pretty much figured would come up during a time, a series about time travel, is the constant thing of, should you change things, because there's always a thing of like, hey, you don't know about the consequences of changing the past. Like, there could always be, unforeseen changes that you never see, for better, for worse. Like, because that's something Lucy has to deal with, because the fact is, she knows history. Like, she's read tons of books about. She even references in the episode. She read lots of books about Lincoln. She also the whole situation. She read about it. She even wrote a book about it. And so she's good at knowing history, because it's like, oh, it's this one finite thing. The past is this way, and this is how it happened. There's no if, and, or buts. Like, yes, there might be some discrepancies here and there. Like, there would never be any clear picture of like what necessarily exactly what happened, but you get all these different people putting their information together. It's like you get a pretty good picture, because he's even been able to know exactly where John Wilkes Booth would be, because it's like, oh, at the stage he's performing, because he also got his mail delivered there. Even bringing up the fact is of his brother Edwin. Talking about the fact is Edwin was like one of the greatest actors around, and John just never really compared. And I like Rufus kind of making a comparison. So he's like, so it's as if, so basically John Wilkes Booth killing the president is as if Donnie Wahlberg killed the president. And Lucy's kind of like, oh yeah, that's a great example. So, but getting back to it, like the whole thing, it's like, you see different people struggling. Well, Rufus sees, like, he talks to those soldiers, get to hear about that particular soldier learning about his family that hasn't seen his wife, and it's just like he's has so much faith in Lincoln. He's like, so much has changed because of Lincoln. It's like he's going to be around and he's going to make things better for us. I'm going to be able to kind of buy my freedom, buy my family's freedom, essentially. That everything's going to work out positively. But Rufus knows that's not going to be the truth, because he wants things to change, because if we can save Lincoln, maybe there's hope for these people. It's like, you can get rid of slavery, just like there'll be more time for things to work out better. Like, things will work out better if he's around, because, Lincoln was taking the steps forward to make things better. And it's like, who knows what drastic changes would have been made if he was still around to continue making those steps forward. Because the moment he was taken out of the picture, it kind of all fell apart. Everything he aimed for kind of fell apart. And even Wyatt kind of comments on it, because he agrees with the fact that changing the past isn't necessarily, like, it should be something they should do. Like, even brings up the fact is, like, because Lucy's like, it's just the way it is. That's how it happened. That just means that it was kind of supposed to be kind of like her version of saying, fate. And White is like, oh, so you're saying that my wife deserved to, like, is supposed to die? That if you had a time machine, would you go back? You wouldn't go back and save her. And he's like, oh, that's what you're saying. And it's sad that you're putting Lucy in that situation, but it's because she kind of understands this whole situation of, like, that's the sad thing with time travel. You can have the best of intentions, but end up screwing everything over. As you look at her situation, her sister doesn't exist in this timeline. And it's like, well, she's already taken a personal effect from it happening. But at the same time, you look at someone like Wyatt, well, in his situation, he might be like, well, it's worth it in the end. I don't care what the changes are. As long as my wife is back in my arms, I could care less what those changes are. So you already get the feeling. I already kind of had that feeling in the first episode, because he was talking about going back in time and trying to save his wife, kind of hinting towards that makes you think eventually down the road he will do it. I don't know what the circumstances will be, whether it's will he go lone wolf, or will they be back in a certain time period where it's like they're a little closer to present time. Like, the fact is, you can go back to a time where you exist, you just shouldn't interact with each other, go paradox thing. So I'm thinking that's what that's going to be. I think they're going to be back in a more present time, like a situation where it's like, oh, they're close to around the time his wife died, and he just has to avoid himself type of situation, who knows how that'll work out, because him saving his wife could lead to someone else dying. Because the same thing with this whole situation. Even though Lucy put up all this front saying that didn't want to change things, like, the moment Flynn showed up and was about to kill the president, she shouted out to warn him, but it was too late. It's just she was content with watching him, like letting it happen, just because that's the way it was. But as she said, knowing history is very different from having a man die in front of your eyes, and it sucked because it leaves you in a situation where you do want to do like what would be the right thing, and that's to save Lincoln's life, but at the same time it's like you don't know what ramifications that would have, because you look at it like, okay, there can only be positive things that happen, there's no way there can be any drawback to it, but it's like you just don't know how the dominoes will affect. Because I mean, you even look at Lucy herself. I was literally about to call her Abigail just because that's the name of the actress, Abigail Spencer, but nevertheless, you look at Lucy's situation. She ended up finding out because the girl Rufus helped her out. Ended up finding out that basically the reason why Amy doesn't exist is because Lucy's mom and dad never actually met each other in this timeline. Essentially, someone that was supposed to die in the Hindenburg, basically one of their descendants, ended up marrying Lucy's dad, so they never got together. But then it clicked in her, it's like, but if that's true, that explains why Amy's not here. Even explains why mom doesn't have lung cancer, because basically her and her dad kind of gave her the bad habit of smoking. So it's like, that makes sense. But then it's like, why am I here? And the girl's like, okay, you're slowly getting it. And it's like, her mom's been lying to her entire life. Her dad isn't her dad. Her dad is Amy's dad, but not her dad. So it does bring up the question, because we never really actually got an answer in the first episode. Whatever happened to, quote unquote, their dad, In particular, in this particular case, Amy's dad, whatever happened to him. Maybe he ended up dying, and was just kind of something she grew up her entire life. Like, she ends up asking her mom about it later on in the episode. I'll get to that in a second, but it's like, her mom is like, oh, you're going to ask me that now? Like, oh, at this whole situation, it's like, well, when is a perfect time to really ask about a situation like about dad? So I'm wondering, maybe in this present timeline, she ended up getting with someone else. Maybe, Lucy's dad is no longer in the picture. Not necessarily that he's dead. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe in this case, she was with him, they split up, and then she got with someone else, and that person, Lucy grew up thinking that person was her dad, and maybe that person died or something like that. And, she doesn't want to answer that. Or maybe it's just because she's running away from it. She's like, really, you're asking such a, thing now? Because the way she was asking, saying, oh, you're asking that now, makes it seem like maybe the dad's dead. But like I said, maybe that's like the person she grew up thinking was her dad, when it in fact wasn't, even in this particular timeline. So what it does make you wonder, though, I know I'm getting super convoluted with this. What happens to the versions of Wyatt, Rufus, and Lucy that are supposed to exist in this timeline, that have lived this life? Because time is revolving around them, essentially. So what happened? Does the versions of them in that particular time not exist, or do they replace that particular version of themselves in that spot in history? Or is it kind of like, because how does that work with them not being there? I know it's like a heavy question, but it does make you wonder, when they change, did they replace themselves in this particular timeline, or is it just kind of a sin? I mean, really, when you think about it, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, most likely what happened is, the fact is that they've lived that life, but they just only have it's kind of like the movie Click a little bit, like your life is on fast forward. So it's like rewinding their life and then having it play out a little bit differently, but they remember it the original way it was. It's kind of how I'm chalking it up. But I'd be kind of interested if you find out that that's actually how this works. I mean, like I said, that was me getting super convoluted with it. I've never really thought about that before until I was just sitting here thinking about that. It just kind of clicked in my head. So even had the whole situation with Flynn, kind of bringing up the fact that he brings up that name again, Rittenhouse, that basically they're the ones that killed his family, not him, that he's doing this trying to save America, not destroy it. So once again, bringing up the fact is that Lucy and him work together. That's her future. So it's like, why interfere now? Your future. We saw the journal last episode and everything. So, but like I said, I'm curious to see what events end up leading to that. Because the way to make it seem like Rittenhouse is kind of behind this whole project, behind Mason, behind Rufus. Because Rufus was even says a name, and Mason was like, don't ever say that name out loud again. So they're behind this, and maybe eventually Lucy kind of gets tired of everything, like basically all of it falling apart because of them, that she decides, you know what, she's going in, like, I'm trying to figure, like, there's so much that can happen with time travel and everything, to find out what exact thing will push Lucy to decide to work with a guy like Flynn, to change so much in history, knowing it will affect her life. But maybe she got to the point where she was tired of, like, history being the way it was. Maybe she eventually kind of went over to Wyatt and Rufus's side of things, and it's like, no, things have to change. We'll make history better for everyone. But at the end of the day, kind of bringing that back into it, that's too much power for one person to have, like even a group of people to have the potential to change everything, because you will be able to dictate what's right, what should work. You kind of play God in this situation of, like, things should work out this way, this person lives, this person dies, you know. And it does make you wonder how much of a role fate does play in it. Like I said, bringing it back to last episode, the girl that Wyatt was trying to save, I'm constantly refer to her as Patty Spivot, the reporter rather, like, he tried to save her, but ultimately she still ended up dying. So could that be a situation of fate, that she was always going to die? Like, it was just time trying to, like, time will always get what it's due in some shape or form. I don't know. Or is it just, she was just unfortunate? It seemed like she might have just been unfortunate, wrong place, wrong time, or haha, pun intended. Well, I don't know if that, I mean, when you talk about the concept of time with time travel and everything, I don't know if that's really a pun necessarily intended. I don't even think it really classifies as a pun, but still, nevertheless. And what I also find fascinating is the people she's working with, essentially Homeland Security. They're kind of fine. It's like, changes, as long as things might be a little different, but as long as they're similar to what they were, it's fine. As long as the world isn't destroyed, some really, like, you know, there's not a whole bunch of chaos, it's like, fine. Like, because Lucy's like, do not, you know, we should be a little more worried about all these different changes that are happening. For instance, John Wilkes Booth was never the one that actually was reported to have killed Lincoln. I mean, because actually we know that Flynn did. Because I was thinking, like when Flynn was trying to hand Booth the gun, but he wouldn't take it. Like, when he was looking in the mirror, because basically he treated it like a performance. He's like, this is what I've kind of imagined it out to be. You won't take that away from me. Obviously, I'm going to use this gun. But Flynn's like, this gun has more bullets. You'll be able to kill more people. He's like, I don't care. This is how I envisioned it. And this is how it's going to be. I'm a little stubborn. I mean, I guess it's, you know, it kind of coincides with the fact it's like, oh, his brother Edwin was kind of the favorite. Everyone loved him. He's the best actor. And maybe, like, he thought, you know, because to him, he's like, this is going to be my way to kind of become famous, you know. I mean, more so infamous than famous, but nonetheless, you know, it's just kind of like, this would have been his calling card. I mean, what we end up finding out is eventually he was tracked down and killed, because they were like, it's not that he was the one that pulled the trigger, but it was like, oh, he was the one behind the whole conspiracy and everything. We also ended up finding out that Lucy, Juliet, what was her name? Shakespeare, something like that, ended up, you know, being such a famous person back then because of everything, because the fact is that she helped save Lincoln's son's life and whatnot, ended up at present day, ended up having a school named after her. And that's kind of one of those things. It's kind of like that situation, like, taking it like a little off trail a little bit, like when naming a Bodie McBoatface type of situation. It's like, it's such a crazy thing that such a dumb thing kind of sticks. I mean, that ended up being a whole joke thing, but you get my point. It's just, it's funny like that. And I guess when you actually break it down, when you look in this episode, like, it seems that John has so much contempt for his brother Edwin, because when Lincoln's son was talking about the fact it's like, oh, your brother saved my life, I owe him a great debt, you know, the Booths and the Lincolns are just kind of essentially saying an ironic statement of, like, they're just, you know, they're very important to each other type of thing. And I think that's probably one reason, like I said before, like, he wanted to be famous. So it seems like whether he 100% agreed with everything, maybe he did, but I feel like his main reason for doing it is because he wanted some attention. That's essentially what it kind of bubbles down to. At least that's how I feel. It's just kind of like he only wanted it all for the fame. So, and it's surprisingly enough, in this episode, we learned a little bit more about Rufus. Kind of where he grew up. The fact is, you know, because the whole situation with Wyatt after he got shot, he was like, you know, trying to help out, like, the vice president, and, you know, Wyatt was going to help out the secretary, and it's like, Rufus was scared. He was like, what if I go there and I don't know what to do? What if I don't act? And essentially, he was bringing up the fact is when he was in Chicago, basically growing up, there's a person basically beat the crap out of him. He never stood up for himself. He never acted. He just get the crap beat out of him. He's like, what if I freeze? And then Wyatt was like, no, you're not going to freeze. The fact of the matter is you've kind of shown yourself to be a very brave person. And he's like, but he's like, I always love that line of like, I'm afraid. And then Wyatt was like, good. I wouldn't go on a battlefield with you if you weren't afraid. It's always, because that's always the thing. Like some people kind of think like, oh, bravery is such an important thing. It's like to be fearless. Fear is a good thing. Fear keeps you alive. It keeps you motivated to stay alive. So it's not a bad, yes, it seems like it can be a hindrance, but sometimes, having fear is a good thing because, it keeps you, it keeps you smart. It keeps you on your toes type of situation. And I did like the whole situation of Rufus pulling the bullet out of, Wyatt, kind of like saying like, Wyatt's like, treat me like one of your circuit boards or something like that. And was basically Rufus is like, oh, this is going to be the worst game of operation ever. And he's about ready to get to the bullet. And then Wyatt kind of winces a little bit. He goes, and then Rufus kind of goes, oh. And then like you see Wyatt kind of laughing about it. It's just like, that's good. That's good. I like Wyatt a lot just because of that terrible sense of humor just then. But I am really fascinated to see where this series goes. Like I'm trying, like, it's time travel. It's hard to figure out, even a possibility of what might be happening next, where it might go. But I'm very fascinated. They already had me hooked with the first episode. This is just progressing it more because it's not just kind of like, the outside world is changing. Because it does seem like with every episode, there's going to be some kind of change. It makes you wonder, will they ever be able to fully keep the timeline in check? Because obviously Flynn isn't able to do everything he wanted to, because not everyone ended up dying like he wanted to. And even in this whole situation, because even in the situation with the Hindenburg, like only like 2 people died when there was actually supposed to be like 30 that died. I mean, granted, that led to the whole situation with Amy as it is, but still. And also, it seems like things don't disappear from alternate timelines, kind of trailing that back a little bit because Lucy still has a necklace, a necklace with a picture of her and her sister. Now, with time being the way it is, that Amy doesn't exist, that shouldn't exist either, yet they're able to maintain what they have. I'm assuming the lifeboat kind of protects them from the changes that are happening in history, because when they come back to their time is kind of like, as they were explained in the first episode, time is kind of bending backwards. When they're time traveling, time kind of bends in upon itself, and you kind of ride upon that fold, like the curve of it bending back upon itself. You're able to ride upon that and end up time traveling. So I'm guessing when the lifeboat kind of comes back to present and the timeline kind of like straightens itself back out, I'm guessing since they're in the lifeboat at that time, like things kind of solidify and they're not affected by it. That's the only way I can chalk it up to the reason why they're the only ones that remember everything as it is, as well as, like I said, the whole necklace situation, which also makes me wonder, will there ever be a point in time they will go to the future or not? I don't think there ever will be. I mean, it could be like a one-off thing where it's kind of like we accidentally go to the future and we see that things are crappy and it's like, yo, how did things get to this point? We have to go back to the present. I mean, present / and the past, the present and the past, to kind of find out like what went wrong to kind of create that future type of situation. I don't know. Because I'm still curious about that. Like I brought it up last time because I compared last week's episode, was comparing it to the Flash about like, having multiple timelines in your head about like, this is how things were before versus how they are now. In this situation, it's like, will they be able to keep their memories of the original timeline, or will they eventually completely fade away? I don't think there's ever a way to completely reset things, are there? I mean, I guess you have to find like a certain focal point that is like the moment, like maybe if they go back in time and they kill Flynn, I mean, even if they killed Flynn at any point in time, it's like eventually, in the past, he still gets the time machine and goes further into the past and screws with things. So it's kind of like, that cycle will always play itself out. So I can't imagine like how they would reset anything that's been done. I mean, ultimate question is, would they want to? It's kind of like if things change for the positive, it's like, okay. But like I said, we've seen the time change only being small. Like, it's like, okay, we know world events are different, yes, but we don't know how those different world events have affected the outside world a lot, because it's kind of a situation of like, I mean, and that's kind of a fascinating thing of like, okay, you come here and it's like everyone else knows time is being this one way, and you're coming there with like, no, things were very different. Like, how did that happen like that? On the question of the Flash, how I brought that up and everything, I know I keep doing that, bringing up other TV shows and stuff. But what I find fascinating is the fact is Barry had time to get allocated to the new timeline. It's like he spent 3 months kind of learning how everything worked in that timeline. But for them, it doesn't work out like that because they're like, okay, they're just kind of in the middle of things and they're kind of stuck with that. So it's kind of like, okay, how do I keep things, straight? Because you're in the middle of it. You don't have time to really kind of bring in like, oh yeah, this is how things work. I mean, I kind of skipped over it, but the whole like Lucy having a fiance thing and everything, and it just clicked in my brain. I actually had to take a second to think about it. I talked about this show before Flash because I was being idiotic about it, because this show aired before the Flash, because this premiered on the 3rd last week. Flash was on the 4th, so I don't know why I'm saying it like that. I don't know why I'm sitting here lying to you like that. I apologize because I'm being a complete idiot about that. It's just I don't know. I think I'm skimming on it now because there was something else time related that I was talking about. I don't remember. There was something else that was related to time that I was recently talking about that I guess sparked that, because it got me thinking about Timeless, and that also got me thinking about the Flash. I don't remember what it was though. Anyway, it's not important. Just overall, like I said, fantastic episode. Cannot wait to see more. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.